The Texas sun was barely up, painting the sky a soft pink over Eldora's little house on the edge of San Antonio. At 68, Eldora wasn't one for early mornings anymore, not like the old days when she'd be up at dawn, chalk in hand, ready to teach a room full of squirming third graders how to spell catastrophe or subtract fractions. Back then, she'd been a force 5 feet of grit and warmth, with a voice that could hush a classroom or make a shy kid feel like a star. Now, retired and alone in a house full of faded yearbooks and dusty knickknacks, mornings were quieter. Too quiet, maybe. She shuffled into the kitchen, her slippers whispering against the linoleum floor. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from last night's toast, a habit she'd kept since her teaching days, when she'd nibble a slice between grading papers. Eldora flicked on the toaster, the familiar hum filling the silence, and reached for the coffee pot. Her hands shook as she poured nothing new there. Just old bones, she'd mutter, brushing it off. She'd been noticing little things lately. Her fingers trembling when she tried to thread a needle, her vision blurring for a split second like a TV losing signal. Even her words tripping over themselves when she called her daughter, June, to chat about the grandkids. Age catches us all, she'd say with a laugh, but the laugh was starting to sound thin. This morning, though, something felt off. Her head throbbed a sharp, pulsing ache behind her eyes that no amount of coffee could fix. She rubbed her temples, wincing, and chalked it up to the weather. Texas summers could fry your brain, right? She popped 2 slices of bread into the toaster and turned to grab a plate from the cabinet. That's when it hit dizziness, sudden and mean, like the room had tilted under her feet. She gripped the counter, her knuckles whitening, and waited for it to pass. It did, after a few seconds, but her heart was racing now, a wild drumbeat she couldn't ignore. Get it together, Eldora, she scolded herself, shaking her head. She wasn't some frail old lady, not yet. She'd spent 35 years wrangling kids, hauling textbooks, standing on her feet all day. A little wooziness wasn't going to take her down. She pushed through, pouring the coffee, black and strong, the way she liked it. But as she lifted the mug, her right arm felt heavy. Not numb, exactly, just weak, like it didn't want to listen. She set the mug down harder than she meant to, coffee sloshing onto the counter. What in the world? She muttered, flexing her fingers. They moved, but slower than they should have. She didn't know it yet, but those little quirks, shaky hands, blurry eyes, a stumble in her speech, headaches from nowhere, dizzy spells, and that strange weakness weren't just age. They were warning signs, 6 red flags screaming that her body was on the brink. The CDC and Stroke Association list them clear as day: sudden tremors, vision loss, slurred words, severe headaches, dizziness, one-sided weakness. Anyone could mean a stroke was lurking, especially after 67, when your odds climb faster than a Texas thermometer in July. Eldora didn't read medical journals. She didn't know her morning toast and coffee routine was starving her of the omega-3s that could protect her brain, omega-3s you'd find in something like cod, if she ever ate it. She didn't see the danger. Not yet. The toaster popped, jolting her out of her thoughts. She reached for the bread, but her hands betrayed her again, shaking worse now, like she'd just run a mile. She managed to butter the toast, the knife scraping loud against the crust, but the smell hit her wrong. Burnt. She'd forgotten to turn the dial down, and the kitchen filled with a sharp, acrid whiff of charred bread. Oh, for Pete's sake, she grumbled, tossing it into the sink. That's when June called. Hey, Mama. June's voice chirped through the phone, bright as ever. How's my favorite teacher doing? Eldora smiled, settling into a chair. Oh, just burning the house down one toast at a time. June laughed, but as Eldora tried to reply, her tongue tripped. She stopped, frowning. The words were there, but they came out garbled, like she'd forgotten how to talk. June went quiet. Mama, you okay? Eldora swallowed hard, forcing a chuckle. Fine, honey. Just tired. But her voice sounded wrong, even to her. She hung up quick, promising to call back later, and sat there, staring at the phone. Her head pounded harder now, a jackhammer in her skull. She didn't want to admit it, but she was scared. Those little hiccups, tremors, blurred vision, slurring had been creeping up for weeks, maybe months. She'd ignored them, laughed them off, blamed the years. But something about this morning felt different. Heavier. Like her body was trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. It all came crashing down an hour later. She decided to cook something simple, a pot of soup to shake off the jitters. She filled the pot with water, set it on the stove, and turned up the heat. The steam rose, warm and familiar, and for a moment, she felt normal. Then it hit again, dizziness, worse this time, paired with that awful weakness in her right side. She reached for the counter, missed, and stumbled. The pot wobbled, teetered, and fell, scalding water splashing across the floor as she crashed to her knees. The sound was deafening, metal clanging, water hissing, her own gasp ripping through the chaos. Eldora froze, hands shaking, knees wet from the spill. The kitchen spun around her, a blur of cabinets and steam. She crawled to the chair, pulling herself up, her breath ragged. "Oh Lord," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. She'd almost gone down, really down. What if she'd hit her head? What if June hadn't called back? What if she'd been alone, unconscious, with no one to find her? The thought clawed at her chest, raw and real. She wasn't just getting old. Something was wrong, bad wrong. She sat there, the pot still dripping on the floor, and replayed it all. The shaky hands she'd ignored, the blurry moments she'd shrugged off, the words that wouldn't come, the headache she'd drowned in coffee, the dizziness she'd blamed on heat, the weakness she'd called fatigue. 6 signs, piling up like storm clouds she'd refused to see. She didn't know they were the calling cards of a stroke, or worse, a TIA, a mini stroke that could be a dress rehearsal for the real thing. She didn't know that cod, plain old fish she'd never bothered with, could have been a lifeline, packed with omega-3s to cut that risk, according to the American Heart Association. All she knew was the fear, cold and sharp, settling into her bones. Eldora wiped her eyes, the burnt toast smell lingering like a ghost. She'd taught kids for decades how to read, how to think, how to live. But she hadn't taught herself how to listen. Not to this. Not to her own body screaming for help. She didn't have the answers yet. But one question burned through the panic. What if the signs you're ignoring are the ones trying to save you? And what about you? Ever brushed off a tremble, a blur, a stumble? Think about it. Those little things might not be so little, especially if you're over 67 or love someone who is. Stick with me, because Eldora's story isn't over. She's about to find out what's really going on and how to fight back before it's too late. Eldora woke up the next morning with the kitchen still haunting her. The pot sat in the sink, cold and accusing, a crust of dried soup clinging to its edge. She'd mopped up the water last night, hands trembling, but the memory of that fall, the hiss of steam, the thud of her knees hitting the floor stuck like glue. Her head ached again, a dull throb that pulsed with every step as she shuffled to the coffee pot. Just another day, she told herself, pouring a cup. But the lie tasted bitter, even with the coffee to wash it down. Something was wrong. She couldn't dodge it anymore. She sank into her armchair, the one with the faded floral print she'd bought when June was still in pigtails. The TV hummed in the background, some morning show she didn't care about, but her eyes drifted to the stack of magazines on the coffee table. The top one caught her, ARP magazine, its cover splashed with a smiling silver-haired woman in bold letters. Foods that fight stroke after 65. Eldora snorted. Yeah, right. Like food's gonna fix me. But curiosity tugged at her, and she flipped it open. The article was short, punchy, cod, your brain's best friend. Packed with omega-3s, it cuts inflammation in your blood vessels, slashing stroke risk by up to 20%, says the American Heart Association. Eldora paused, mug halfway to her lips. Cod. She hadn't eaten fish in years, maybe a tuna sandwich here and there, but cod? Never. Her diet was toast, coffee, maybe a bowl of canned soup if she felt fancy. She kept reading. After 67, your brain and heart need all the help they can get. Don't wait for a wake-up call. Too late for that, she thought, her stomach twisting. That pot on the floor was her wake-up call. She set the magazine down, her mind spinning. Those signs, the shaky hands, the blurry vision, the slurred words on the phone with June, the headaches, the dizziness, the weakness, they weren't random. She'd ignored them, sure, but now they felt like pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. She grabbed her old iPad, the one June had given her for Christmas 3 years back, and tapped open Google. Stroke warning signs, she typed, her fingers clumsy on the screen. The results hit her like a freight train. The CDC's list stared back: sudden numbness or weakness on one side, vision trouble, difficulty speaking, severe headache, dizziness or loss of balance. 6 signs. 6 matches. She scrolled further. Stroke association added TI, a mini stroke, a warning shot that could mean the real deal was coming. Up to 40% of TIA patients have a full stroke within a year, it said. Eldora's breath caught. A year? She dropped the iPad onto her lap, hands shaking worse than ever. No, she whispered. Not me. She wanted to shove it all away, close the tab, toss the magazine, pretend yesterday never happened. But then her iPad chimed. FaceTime. June's name lit up the screen, and before Eldora could think, she swiped to answer. Her granddaughter's face popped up. Lila, 8 years old, all freckles and giggles. Hi, Nana. Lila chirped, waving a sticky hand covered in what looked like pancake syrup. Eldora forced a smile. Hey, sugar. Where's your mama? She's making breakfast, Lila said, then leaned closer, her big blue eyes squinting. Nana, you look funny. You okay? Eldora opened her mouth to say fine, but it happened again. Her tongue twisted. I am Jay, just the word slurred, thick and slow, like she was underwater. Her vision flickered, Lila's face blurring into a smudge of color. Panic clawed at her chest. She blinked hard, and it cleared, but not before Lila's smile vanished. Nana? Nana. The girl's voice spiked, shrill with fear. Mama, come quick. June's face appeared, shoving Lila aside. Mama? What's wrong? Eldora tried to answer, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. In nothing, she managed, but it sounded wrong, garbled, foreign. June's eyes widened. Mama, you're slurring. Can you see me okay? Eldora nodded, shaky, but the truth was her right eye fell off, like a curtain had dropped for a second and lifted. June didn't buy it. That's it. I'm calling Dr. Ellis. You're going to the doctor today. No arguments. The call ended, Lila's scared little Nana echoing in Eldora's ears. She sat there, frozen, the iPad slipping to the floor with a soft thud. Her head pounded harder now, a storm raging behind her skull. She flexed her right hand, still weak, still slow. The magazine lay open beside her, that word cod mocking her. She thought of her kitchen spill, the burnt toast, the coffee she'd clung to like a lifeline. Had she done this to herself? Years of skipping fish, guzzling caffeine, ignoring the signs? June didn't waste time. 2 hours later, Eldora was in Dr. Ellis's office, perched on a crinkly paper sheet, her daughter hovering like a hawk. The doctor, a wiry man with a drawl as thick as hers, listened as she recounted it all. The tremors, the blurred moments, the slurring, the headaches, the dizziness, the weakness. He didn't sugarcoat it. Eldora, those are classic TIA symptoms. Transient ischemic attack. A mini stroke. You're lucky it didn't go full-blown yet. He tapped his pen on the chart. Your blood pressure's through the roof, and your diet's not helping. You've got 6 warning signs here, and they're loud. Next time, it might not stop. Eldora's mouth went dry. Next time? Dr. Ellis nodded. Stroke's a sneaky bastard. These TAs are like flares, your brain's saying, fix this, or I'm done. Omega-3s, like in cod, can cut the risk. Studies back it up. American Heart Association, Mayo Clinic, all say the same. You need to eat better, move more, watch these signs like a hawk, or you're rolling the dice. She left with a prescription, a pamphlet, and a pit in her stomach. June drove her home, silent but steely, and Eldora stared out the window at the Texas sprawl, cactus, gas stations, endless sky. 6 signs. 6 chances she'd missed. She'd taught kids to spot trouble: storm clouds, bullies, Wrong answers, but she'd been blind to her own. I've spent my life raising other people's babies, she thought, bitter. Why didn't I save myself? Hey, let's pause right here. If you're with me this far, drop a 2 in the comments below. I want to know you're out there. And tell me, have you ever noticed one of these 6 signs in yourself or someone you love? Shaky hands, blurry eyes, slurred words, headaches, dizziness, weakness. Any ring a bell? Hit me with your stories in the comments. I'm reading every one. Let's keep going. Back home, Eldora sat at her kitchen table, the pamphlet spread out like a map to survival. 6 warning signs, in black and white. Hand tremors, sudden vision loss, speech trouble, severe headaches, dizziness, one-sided weakness. She'd checked every box. Dr. Ellis's words rattled her. Next time, it might not stop. She pictured Lila's scared face, June's clenched jaw. She imagined herself on the floor again, not just spilling soup, but out cold, gone. A stroke could steal her voice, her sight, her legs, her life. At 68, she wasn't ready to lose it all. She picked up the magazine again, thumbing to that COD article. 20% less risk, it promised. Could it be that simple? Fish instead of toast? She didn't know, but she was done rolling the dice. Those 6 signs weren't just quirks, they were sirens, blaring for her attention. And for the first time, Eldora was listening. The question hit her hard, sharp as a Texas wind. If you saw these signs, would you wait or would you fight? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She wasn't waiting anymore. Eldora didn't sleep much that night after Dr. Ellis's warning. The pamphlet sat on her nightstand, its stark list of 6 warning signs glowing in the dim light like a ghost she couldn't shake. Hand tremors, vision loss, speech trouble, headaches, dizziness, weakness, every word a punch to the gut. She dodged a bullet with that TI, but next time loomed over her like a Texas thunderstorm ready to break. At 68, she wasn't ready to go, not when Lila's sticky little hands still waved at her through FaceTime. Not when June still needed her mama's voice on the other end of the line. She had to fight, and if COD was her weapon, she'd learn to wield it. The next morning, Eldora stood in her kitchen, staring down the coffee pot like it was an old enemy. She poured half a cup, progress, not perfection, and turned to the fridge. No COD yet, but June had promised to bring some over. For now, she'd start small. She grabbed an apple, sliced it with shaky hands, and ate it slow, the crunch loud in the quiet house. The American Heart Association said diet mattered. Omega-3s in fish like cod could cut stroke risk, but hydration and movement were key too. She filled a glass with water, no lemon to hide the taste this time, and drank it down. Baby steps, she muttered, wiping her mouth. I'm not dead yet. June showed up that afternoon, a grocery bag in one hand and Lila bouncing behind her. Mama, I got you cod fillets, June said, setting them on the counter. Fresh from the market. You're eating this tonight. Eldora raised an eyebrow. Bossy, aren't you? June smirked, but her eyes were soft. Someone's got to keep you around. Lila tugged at Eldora's sleeve. Nana, cook it yummy, okay? Eldora chuckled, ruffling the girl's hair. I'll try, sugar. That night, she did. She found a recipe online, cod with garlic and butter, simple enough for a rookie. The kitchen filled with a warm, savory smell as the fish sizzled in the pan, a far cry from burnt toast. She added a side of steamed carrots, another stab at healthy, and sat down to eat. The first bite surprised her. Tender, rich, nothing like the fishy stench she'd feared. Well, she said aloud, chewing slow. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. She ate cod twice that week, then 3 times the next, swapping out her usual canned soup and coffee binges. The Mayo Clinic said it could lower blood pressure, ease inflammation. Eldora didn't feel it yet, but she trusted the promise. She didn't stop at food. Mornings became a mission. She'd step outside, water glass in hand, and walk 10 minutes around the block at first, past the neighbor's yapping dog and the mailbox shaped like a longhorn. Her legs wobbled. Her head still throbbed some days, but she pushed to 15 minutes, then 20. The Texas sun beat down, but she soaked it in, feeling her heart thud stronger, steadier. Keep moving, Dr. Ellis had said. It's your shield. She pictured those 6 signs: tremors, blurred vision, slurring, headaches, dizziness, weakness lurking like bandits, and every step felt like a shot fired back. It wasn't smooth sailing. The headaches lingered, sharp and mean, especially when she skipped water. Her right hand trembled when she tried to write Lila a note, the pen skittering across the page. Once, mid-walk, dizziness hit hard. She leaned against a fence, panting, until it passed. "Come on, old girl," she'd growl, forcing herself home. But the winds piled up too. Her vision stayed clear longer, no more random blurs. Her words didn't trip as often when she called June. The weakness in her arm eased, bit by bit. She wasn't cured, no magic fix, but she was fighting. The real test came 3 months later. Eldora got an invite to a reunion of retired teachers from her old school, a small gathering at the community center, just 20 familiar faces. She almost skipped it. Crowds made her nervous now, and what if her voice failed again? But June wouldn't hear it. "Mama, you're going. You've been cooped up too long." So Eldora went, cod-powered and stubborn, in her best blue dress, the one she'd worn to her last day of teaching. The room buzzed with chatter, the smell of coffee and pecan pie thick in the air. Old colleagues waved, their smiles warm but curious. "Eldora, you look good," one said, and she nodded, unsure if they meant it. Then it happened. The organizer tapped a mic and asked if anyone wanted to speak. Hands shot up, but Eldora's stayed down, her throat tight. She hadn't spoken in front of a group since that FaceTime call, since her tongue turned traitor. But then she saw Mrs. Grady, her old lunchroom buddy, watching her, eyes soft. "Go on, Eldora," she whispered. "We miss your voice." Eldora stood, legs shaky but holding, and took the mic. The room hushed. She cleared her throat, picturing Lila's sticky wave, June's steely faith, that sizzling cod in her pan. "I just want to say," she paused, heart hammering. "No slur, no stumble. It's good to see y'all. I've missed you." Her voice rang clear, steady, like the teacher she'd been. She kept going, talking about her years in the classroom, the kids who'd shaped her. No blur in her eyes, no tremor in her hands as she gripped the mic. When she finished, the room clapped loud, real, and Mrs. Grady hugged her tight. "That's the Eldora I know," she said, tears in her eyes. Eldora sat down, her own eyes wet. She'd done it. No slurring, no falling, no fading. The cod, the walks, the water, they'd pulled her back from the brink. The Stroke Association said omega-3s could cut stroke risk by strengthening blood vessels, and she felt it now, stronger, sharper, alive. Those 6 signs hadn't won. She had. Back home, she taped a list to her fridge. 6 warning signs to watch: hand tremors, vision loss, speech trouble, headaches, dizziness, weakness, and 3 rules to live by. Eat cod or any omega-3 rich fish 2-3 times a week. Walk every day. Call 911 if the signs hit hard. She even scribbled her cod recipe on note cards, handing them out to neighbors like lesson plans from her teaching days. "Try it," she'd say, grinning. "Save my hide." The high point came a week later. Lila visited, bounding in with a drawing Eldora in a cape, labeled Super Nana. They cooked cod together, giggling as butter splattered the stove. Afterward, they sat on the porch, the Texas dusk glowing orange, and Lila hugged her tight. "You're not sick anymore, Nana," she said. Eldora's throat closed up. "Not today, sugar," she whispered, hugging back. She wasn't the teacher she'd been at 40, commanding a room with chalk and grit. But she wasn't the shadow of 3 months ago either, crumbling under ignored warnings. She was Eldora 68, scarred, fierce, and here. She hadn't just dodged a stroke. She'd reclaimed her life. And you, where do you stand? Those 6 signs aren't just Eldora's, they could be yours, your mom's, your grandpa's. Hands shaking out of nowhere. Eyes going fuzzy. Words slipping. Head splitting. Balance gone. One side weak. Don't wait for the kitchen floor to wake you up. Start now. Grill some cod. Take a walk. Know the signs. Call 911 if they hit. Eldora didn't wait for next time, and neither should you. At 67 and beyond, Every day's a chance to fight back. She took hers. The question's yours. What's your move? Don't let those signs be your end. Make them your beginning.